because I'm always kind of like tense. As much as I may look relaxed, I'm always thinking about what's the next thing I got to do. And I haven't had a vacation, I'm thinking maybe 35 years.
That was musician Papa C, aka Maestro Curtis. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. Quick announcement. We put up a donation button over on the homepage of our website, storiedsf.com. Michelle and I want to keep doing this podcast forever, and we want to keep it free for y'all to listen to also. Anything you can pitch in to help us pay for audio equipment, photography gear, web hosting, and podcast hosting is deeply appreciated. Okay, on with the show. Welcome to episode 16, part 1. This one is pretty damn special for us. We learned about the Curtis family C notes thanks to Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast. We were blown away by this 7-piece family band. Mom, dad, and 5 kids of ages ranging from 10 to 16. Then we learned that they live here in the city, and we nearly had a meltdown of excitement. Reaching out to them on Instagram seemed like a pipe dream. But they responded with the same kindness, generosity, and love that comes through in our recording with them. Please find the Curtis family C notes all over the internet and social media, and let them and their music into your life. Here's Papa C.
I'm a Louisiana dude, and I'm a San Francisco dude. You might as well say I'm from San Francisco because I've been here so long.
Okay.
I started school in Jim Crow, South, in Louisiana, in the 60s, early 60s. I was born in the late 50s, mid-late 50s.
Where about in Louisiana?
New Orleans, and then we kept moving to run from the storms.
Right.
Every time there was a storm, my family kept saying, let's get the hell out of here, let's move on up.
Move inland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my mother's side of the family, although my mother was born in Gary, Indiana, my grandfather, who was half Chinese and half black, was in the FBI. So he posed a lot as like a taxi cab driver and whatever J. Edgar Hoover and those guys wanted him to do.
Yeah.
And he came back to Louisiana, grabbed my grandmother, and then went back to Chicago, and they worked around the Gary, Indiana, and Chicago area. And then my parents were born. My mother was born, actually.
Okay.
And her twin brother.
Oh, wow.
So my grandmother had 13 children and 3 sets of twins.
Whoa.
And
okay.
my grandfather had a total of 15 children.
Wow.
And
did you know a lot of those folks growing up? All of them?
I knew all of them, except for the older 2.
Right.
That my grandfather had before my grandmother.
Oh, got it.
And my mother being the eldest, she and her twin brother. And then I'm the eldest grandson. So
okay.
I have uncles and aunts who are like younger than I am.
Right.
So, or around the same age. And so that was an interesting thing growing up in a house of 14. Kind of fluctuated between 12, sometimes 10, 12. I think at the most we had maybe 13, 14 in the house at one time. And, you know, living in a tin shack.
Yeah.
In the South. But we didn't know we were poor. It's like nobody knows that. When you're growing up in the South, the community, if you go out and say you hunt and you kill some game, you share it with the entire community.
Yep.
And whatever else you have, everyone, you take this over there to Old Man Jackson. So I grew up with that. And that carried over to when I came here as a youngster and finished, you know, parts of elementary school. And then my mother and my biological dad, they divorced.
Okay.
And then my mother, in fact, my dad was one of the first black police officers in San Francisco.
Okay, wow. So you came out with both of them?
It was
Or
sort of a back and, yeah, because one of the things that happened was when she tried to come out here to make a better life for us.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she and my dad came out here to do that, yeah, didn't go down so well.
Right.
And then so he was kind of a gambler. And my mother said the last straw was when he gambled all the furniture out the house. She was done. So he kind of had a little issue there. But he was a good man, though.
Mm-hmm.
Never wanted for anything. Never needed anything. He always took care of us. That was always priority. Just had a weakness. And so she came back to Louisiana and stayed for a while, and my grandmother made her go back to school.
Okay.
And so she had already had a scholarship, but she wanted to come out west because we had family out here who owned businesses.
In San Francisco?
San Francisco and Oakland.
Okay.
My grandmother's sister, Doll, used to own a restaurant in Oakland.
Okay.
And then we own, businesses here in San Francisco. Like Fillmore, when I was growing up here, was all black.
Mm-hmm.
All these businesses from here all the way damn near to the marina.
Yep.
And so there was always, and it was, when I came out here, San Francisco was segregated.
Yeah.
Just a trip,
Yep.
these little pockets of things going on here.
Yep.
But black businesses thrived.
Mm-hmm. So you must have witnessed redevelopment in this area.
Well, here's the interesting thing about it. I was kind of shuffled back and forth
Mm-hmm.
to Louisiana because of the turmoil that was going on between my mother and my dad.
Okay.
Then my mother remarried, and it wasn't until my mother remarried that we began to live more of a stable life.
Right.
My mother was very active in the church and active in civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think 2 times that Dr. King came, she would be the open soloist.
Oh, wow.
For Dr. King.
That's awesome.
Even at the Cow Palace when he came, and I think he came around the corner. Church that I used to play with around the corner,
Okay.
Macedonia.
Wow.
And so those are some interesting times. And I don't want to be jumping all over the place, but just to kind of give you some light on what was going on with me, it was that divorce thing that kind of kept me going back and forth from Louisiana. So I spent a lot of time, and this was an interesting time too, because when she got with my dad that raised me, my father lived right around the corner from us. And that's a whole nother story right there I don't even want to get into.
Yeah.
But the thing was, I grew up with 2 fathers.
Right.
And they were in solidarity.
Okay.
So who grows up with 2 fathers?
Yeah.
Who were like on the same page?
Get along, yeah.
And then my mother, there's only one mother. There's always only one mother.
Yeah.
And so she was a very active person, a school teacher. And she emphasized the importance of knowledge and learning at a very young age. And in my community was filled with Black Panthers.
Mm.
So whether we wanted to be Black Panthers or not, we were Black Panthers.
Right.
Because they started as baby Black Panthers, junior Black Panthers, and then you eventually, became one of the whatever you needed to be. But it was really out of love for community.
Absolutely.
And turned into something, or was labeled something else.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was some corruption. There's always corruption in leadership.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was just designed to protect the community from police brutality, which was taking place, and try to clean up the drugs in the community. And at the same time, we started the food programs all over America, taking care of our elders, making sure that they were safe, getting home. And from this effort came all these you had the Brown Panthers, you had all these other different entities that were beginning to see the value of family and community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we go back to that word family for us. And so growing up here in San Francisco, I grew up in this area, but also grew up in and the Haight-Ashbury, which all of this really kind of was connected.
Yeah.
I had to walk from here to Haight-Ashbury.
And it wasn't called Upper Haight then, right?
No.
It was called Haight-Ashbury. Yeah.
This was called the Mo.
Yeah.
And the Fillmore went all the way up to partly to Haight, and then that part was called Haight-Ashbury. And I went to school there.
Right.
And my family owned a liquor store that's on the corner of Cole and Haight Street.
Oh, wow.
Which used to be called Dunkley's Liquor. That was my dad's nephew. And I used to work in the store during high school until he found an empty bottle of Ripple.
Uh-oh.
Which,
Uh-oh.
I don't know if you know what Ripple is. Ripple was wine.
Okay.
Cheap wine on top of that, like Thunderbird. And that really was the end of my career as a clerk in the grocery store. But I went to school right across the street from Kezar, right on Frederick.
Polly?
I went to Poly. You know, I ran track. I was a track star, but never hardly went to class because it was too close to Hippie Hill.
Yeah. There you go.
And the Haight.
Yep.
So I was hanging out, you know, but I read a lot. That's what kept me. And I was kind of like my mother's nightmare in the sense that I hated social injustice. And I would sneak, and back then, parents, they spanked their child. Well, they wouldn't. I don't spank it. You got beaten, you know. It was like, in fact, here's a funny story. In Louisiana, to show you how slave mentality was perpetuated, they used to take the cowhide and they called it a gin belt. And the thing was heavy like a razor strap, right? And they'd keep it over the door. And then if you misbehaved, they'd make you go get that gin belt or make you go outside and get a switch. And so if you came back with a switch that wasn't adequate, then they go out there and get the tree and come back and beat you with it, right? Jeez. Well, my grandmother and my grandfather gave my mother gin belts, so we always had a gin belt in San Francisco, so you didn't want that. Yeah. But I used to justify it. I would justify, I know I'm going to get a whipping, but I would be on that front line. And I was like that at 13 years old. Wow. And this one is just like me. This one right here.
Which one? Do we want to name that one?
Yeah.
This is Kiki.
Okay.
Oh. Yeah.
Kiki is just like her father.
Okay.
She spends a lot of time in that energy field, in that matrix of just not really liking social injustice on any level. And it's a trip to see that and having to deal with that.
Well, she listens to documentaries, Angela Davis, Angela Davis, Malcolm X. She has that playing where other kids are listening to like music. She's listening to old debates and speeches from the 60s and 70s. So she's
So to make my story short, I mean, because it's a very long story, being in my 60s, the music aspect of it and the martial arts was what kept me grounded.
When did you start playing instruments or performing?
I can't remember when I wasn't.
Okay.
It was taken more serious because I was performing for my mother's company. Would come over, and at 3 or 4 years old, she'd have me doing the James Brown or Sam Cooke. I'd be doing something, right? Jackie Wilson doing the splits, and I would, do my thing, and they would throw money on the ground. And so I learned how to do the splits, pick the money up, spin around, put it in my pocket, and be strutting, right? And that became like this regular thing. It was like, back then, my mother used to sing to raise money for the rent, or I would dance. That was all part of it. Yeah. There would be something musical going on, cooking or something, because it was, some tough times. But one thing I always had to do was I had to go back every summer because I had to work the fields. My grandfather, at 5 years old, I was working in a cotton field. Can you believe that in this day and age? Yeah. I wasn't picking cotton. Yeah. But I would bring them the water, I would drag the bag, and my grandmother was adamant, if you could walk and you could talk, your ass was out there working.
And it's hot. I'm from close to that part of the world. It's
Yeah.
no joke in the summer.
And, growing up with that mentality, I've always had a work ethic
Yeah.
that has just been, I know no one else with my work ethic. It's like,
Right.
just always.
Got that drive.
I don't like it, though, because it has kept me from relaxing the way that I know that I should, because I'm always kind of like tense. As much as I may look relaxed, I'm always thinking about what's the next thing I got to do. And I haven't had a vacation, I'm thinking maybe 35 years.
Wow.
If I had one then.
Right.
And my wife and I, we haven't even had a honeymoon, let alone a vacation.
Wow.
But I will tell you, when we went to America's Got Talent, it almost felt like it was a vacation.
Yeah.
This is cool.
Well, I'll say y'all earned that. But you mentioned martial arts. Do you want to talk about that a little bit before we move on?
My
Mama?
Shihan was the martial arts instructor for the Black Panthers, the Nation of Islam. We trained the police department. He also worked with Master Powell, who they trained the CIA and FBI and that kind of thing. So I was really, really deep into the martial arts thing at a young age. And then kind of left it for a little while, and then when I moved back, did a little boxing in the Army, some martial arts in the military. But when I moved back to here in 89, 90, I got way more deeper into my art. And I'd already had a black belt from way back then. And then when I came here, I learned the new system, which was more around combat style. Now, keep in mind, we were doing MMA with the Gracies,
Right.
the Coliseum,
Right.
way back then, and we wiped the floor up with the Gracies.
Okay.
Our dojo did. We actually did. We had the #1 dojo in the world at one time, and in part because my Shihan, Henry James Larkin, which we endearingly refer to him as Pop Larkin, known as Jim Larkin, he had some teenagers off the street who were fighters. We grew up fighting. We were street kids that he wanted to teach some discipline to. And so he imparted a lot of us are gone. In part because, we weren't able to digest a lot of the stuff that he gave us, and ended up just being taken out because we were so ominous on the streets and dealing with it, and people feared a lot of us. I was fortunate that I left here and went off to school. And I pray that I wasn't here, because I had a temper just like everybody else. It's
Right.
like you growing up in a neighborhood, it was a survival thing.
Right.
But a lot of us are gone, just either, by way of prison, murdered, taking ourselves out through drugs and that kind of thing. I had parents who taught me a little more of how critical thinking needed to be in the process.
Awesome.
And so that was what saved me. But the martial arts has been 50 years,
Yeah. Wow.
and then when I came back in the 90s, it got way more intense, and I had to go through his new system that he created from the Larkin Bushido, and it was just, it's been an amazing journey. And then now all my children are martial artists. We get up in the morning, 6:30, sometimes 5:30, and we're out training,
Nice.
teaching them self-defense and self-discipline. And that's the most important thing, is the self-discipline that teaches you to use this to fight with, not this. Because it's not about using this. It's about, okay, I need to get home at the end of the day.
It's a muscle.
Honey,
So-
can you say it? Because it's
A podcast.
use your mind.
So my
instead of-
mind, because at the end of the day, it's not about fighting. That's the ultimate last result. Learning how to use this to
Mouth.
talk your way out of it, using your mouth to talk yourself in your brain, to to quell a situation and to make the person comfortable enough to know that you're not a threat to them, but at the same time, you're not going to let them be a threat to you.
Right.
But if we could have some mutual respect for each other and that, hey, at the end of the day, baby, it's all about love.
Right on.
And I'm not going to tell you how many situations I've talked down. I've even had people just break down and start crying, come hug me, because they never had that approach.
Right.
It was always this.
Yeah.
It's like, and then now I see them on the streets. Every time they see me, they want to come give me a hug, you know, or I see them misbehaving and I can see them change what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So it's been quite a journey, you know.
Did you say that it was late 80s, early 90s? Is that when you came to San Francisco kind of for good, or when was that?
Well, because of the on and off situation, I literally got kicked out of California.
Okay.
Because
After high school?
It was during high school, but I wasn't. My mother, they caught me putting weapons on the back of a truck. Mm-hmm. I was underage. Mm-hmm. And so when they put me in juvenile, I went to juvenile 3 or 4 times. Never for anything other than social justice. Mm-hmm. So if they handcuffed everybody else, they handcuffed me and took me down. I was down there. I used to sneak out of the house. A couple times I was on television, and I thought I was trying to get away with it, and my mother saw me on television, and she would whip me then. Yeah. I got whippings up until I was 18 years old. Yeah. 17, getting ready to turn 18. And that's when I realized, okay, I got to get out the house. It's time to go. I'm going to take this scholarship to college, and I'm just get away from this.
Okay.
But get back to your question. Your question was?
Oh, just when was it that you kind of just came to San Francisco to stay? Like, when did San Francisco, when did the back and forth stop?
Okay, so there was a period where it was like 3 years. So I did the 3rd to the 5th grade here, then went back to Louisiana because they needed more people back there to help with the whatever. And then I came back in the 7th grade, did Everett. My children all went to, some of them went to the same schools I went to.
Yeah.
That was and then left, came back in the 9th. In the 10th grade, I got kicked out of California, but that was cooked up with my mother up at juvenile, my mother was a school teacher. Mm-hmm. So they cooked that whole thing up. My mother let my butt stay in juvenile this time, because they used to have it where you could come get the guy get your boy, come get your boy, right? Well, this time, my dad was out of town because my dad used to drive Greyhound that raised me. So he would have let me stay in there. But my mother said, he was doing a charter, I think, and my mother made up her mind, I'm gonna let his butt fry in there for a while, right?
Okay.
So I'm in there with all of these like really criminal minded children. I'm like, wait a minute, this ain't even me. I don't even think like this.
Right.
And then that Monday, this was on a Thursday, on that Monday, the judge, they used to have court right there, and he'd come in with his robe on and his, you know, and my mother was sitting there when they brought me in, and he said, I sentence you to 16 months of log cabin. Ooh. It's like, whoa, that's kind of harsh. Yeah. I was thinking to myself, suspended sentence, you have to leave my state. Mm. That was cooked up. My mother, and then she told me later that she cooked it up. And then she had my records expunged and all this other stuff. But when I got to Louisiana, my grandparents had me walking the chalk line. I couldn't do anything, couldn't go anywhere. It was like, and I realized, hey, I didn't want this. So I got myself together, came back out here in 11th grade, and got more involved in a lot more positive interaction in the community that didn't deal with so many things that were looked at as radical. But I got into junior achievements, the NAACP, which was a lot, but we were still kind of radical, because we were actually responsible for getting the voting age to 18 in the state.
Oh, wow.
It was us. We were
I don't think I knew that. That's
with
awesome.
Lieutenant Mervyn Dimely. And so I was working with what was called the Kazana Youth Council, Andre Dupre, Tamatra Scott, Yuri Waters, all these great figures in the community during that time, who they were sort of like the nonviolent aspect of the community, who were getting a lot done. And at that point, the Black Panthers were looked at as like, just crazy. And this community was crazy back then, because you had Jim Jones, you had the Nation of Islam, it is all in the same
post
block.
office, right?
Jim's was he was in the synagogue, where the post office is now.
Yeah, and the Nation of Islam was right next door.
In what is now the Fillmore, right?
It was bizarre.
Yeah.
It was like, wow. It was the strangest times, right? And I had many of my friends who died in Guyana.
Oh, wow. And
that I grew up with, whose
Okay.
parents, went that route.
Yeah.
But there was some strange times growing up here in San Francisco, and I was off to college when I saw that whole thing go down. But I knew many of my friends who used to talk about, hey man, I'm going down to Jones Temple, man. I don't want to. They left the church, and they were giving up their homes and all this craziness. And some of us who grew up as Baptists and Methodists, we looked at that thing like, man, that's ridiculous.
Right, it's out there.
So there was some weird energy going on during that time. And again, I was off college during that time when that whole thing went down. But yeah, my story is all over the place. It's kind of like Forrest Gump.
Okay.
I just happened to be in these places where things were going on. I mean, like the riots, I was right there in the middle of that. 65 riots. I was in LA, just happened to be there with my uncle who lived there. When the 92 riots went down, I was in LA. I was in the studio with the persons who orchestrated it. I was in RCA, and when the verdict went down, I saw the guy go to the phone, get on the phone and said, he was talking to someone, and he said, "We are no longer colors, we are a united front." Well, I was invited down there by one of my college classmates. And he said, "Man, why don't you come on down? I'm in town, I'm producing the old singer from New Birth." I said, "Yeah, I'll come on down." So, and I'm in the studio, and when I drive off, I see these guys in white t-shirts and khaki pants pick up one of those steel garbage cans and throw it into this jewelry store and take all the jewelry out. I'm like, and as soon as I turned down Western Street, I could see fires as far as the eye could see. It was just, it was so surreal. I mean, it's like I was in all these places when all this stuff went down. Just kind of a weird situation. But anyway, that's kind of the short end of my story. This is kind of all over the place. I've been here, I've been there. I did 7 years in the United States Army. I've been married before. This is
The last.
This is it. This is it. I have 4 grown children.
Okay.
And they're all doing pretty well. You know. That's the short of it.
Okay, maybe we should move over to Mama then.
Yeah, I think
Let's talk to Mama. Thank you, Papa.
Yeah, Papa C's so interesting. It's funny because we've been places, and because Maestro knows so much about the city and they hear him talk, there was this major publisher that, he's an editor there, and he was like, "There's a story. I've got to get your story." And he was like, "I don't have time to put it together. I don't want to do that." And then Papa was like, "It ain't over yet." And I was like, "Oh, that is a good book." But yeah, it's like you can take any section of his life and kind of break it down, and it's like his movie is like a saga.
I was going to say, it's a series, not a book.
Yeah.
Well, I got that from Maurice White, Earth, Wind, and Fire. When I signed with that company, I was sitting there, and I don't want to take up all your time, but I was sitting there, and he was approached. Guy came in and said, "We want to do your life story." And Maurice said, "I just signed with them, with that company, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And Maurice said, "My story ain't over. Why don't you wait till I'm gone?
Good answer.
Wait till I'm gone."
Yeah.
And the guy said, "Okay."
Okay, Mama C.
Uh-huh.
Let's hear your story that you're still writing.
Well, I guess just to keep it musical, and maybe I'll start later. I mean, I was not raised in a musical family. My relationship with music started in the performing arts, I suppose. I grew up as a competitive ice skater.
Oh.
And I'm Tongan, so it's funny because a lot of people don't even know what a Tongan is, but people that do know, they're like, how did an islander get involved in ice skating?
It's like hockey in Arizona. I'm
Yeah.
like, how does that work?
Yeah. So, well, in San Mateo, they had this ice rink that was called Fashion Island. And it was like it was open, so that's why it was so cool, because it wasn't freezing.
Mm-hmm. And
I remember when I would go there as a child, my brothers would go to the arcade, and I used to love watching the ice skaters. And I was about 7 years old, and then my mom caught me trying to climb over the rail so I can get on the ice. And my parents, God bless them, they had me in ballet, they had me in tap dance, and they were like, oh gosh, another thing. And when I took to the ice, it was like a fish to water. I could literally just like step on, and it felt very natural. And that particular ice rink, a lot of greats came out of that. There was Christy Yamaguchi, Brian Boitano. They all came out of that camp. And I was very fortunate to have met these people, and my mom even made an ice skating dress for Christy, and she did a show, which was really great. And
that's awesome.
because they came from a small ice rink, because it's very small compared to an Olympic-sized ice rink. But they felt compelled to come and still train there from time to time, and they would talk to the children, and were very lovely.
This is after they got big in Olympics and all that?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. And they would come by, and we would be like, oh my gosh, why are they here? But,
Right.
it was kind of like when they came to that ice rink, looking back on it, as a child, I was like, why are they here in this small rink? But I realized a lot of times they were doing rehab, or they were just getting ready for a show, or they just wanted to get back with old friends and just kind of like, hey, let's just skate. And the thrill of my life was when I was able to see Surya Bonali ice skate there. And my ice skating coach was hired to work with her so she could become more artistic. And my ice skating coach was amazing, Tracy Prusak, that was her name. And so when Surya Bonali stepped on the ice, it was like everybody would just back up because she was so powerful. We even saw her do a backflip, and we were like, ah! So, and then I remember like my biggest thrill, because I was a horrible competitor. I could do a lot of the jumps and the spins, but competition was just, I just locked up. And if it was an ice skating show, I could land everything, do everything. So my coaches used to have me on the ice, and they're like, hey, just do your competition routine for the show.
Okay.
And then I would do it, and they would be like, oh, great. And then as soon as I hit the competition, it was just, there's something about that atmosphere that turned me off, and they wouldn't allow me to cheer on my friends. What are you doing? Don't watch your friend. I was like, but I love Amanda. Like
it's a different mindset competition, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And back then there were parents that used to cut up the girls' dresses, or and your cassette tape might be like tore up, so you'd have to back up. So it's so stupid.
Yeah.
But that was my first experience with falling in love with performing with music.
Right. How old were you?
I was from 7 till about 14.
Okay.
14 is old if you're trying to still compete nationally. But it was largely when my father passed. That was when from being from an immigrant family, and this is common amongst a lot of people of color, talking about your feelings, that's just not an option, especially if you're mourning. It's, I think if anyone, because my mom did have, you know, a lot of her friends, you know, say, oh, do you guys need to talk to anybody? That just wasn't a thing. So I don't know if that was I believe it was a huge part of me just maybe losing motivation with ice skating, or I just wanted to just kind of leave it all. That's where music kind of left me, and that was a time in my life where I felt like I didn't know what I was going to do. But the one thing that I believe that really saved me was I did have a passion for reading.
Okay.
Like my husband, I didn't like going to class.
Right.
I loved reading things that was not assigned. And so I would do my thing. I barely graduated high school, but I'm glad I did eventually finish. But I was able to go into a program where as a high school student, I could graduate on time if I took community college courses. And my senior year, that's when I signed up for a history of jazz course taught by Fred Berry. And that was the first time I heard Ella Fitzgerald's voice.
Oh, yeah.
And I was in a big auditorium and the loudspeakers. And when I say she changed my life, just hearing that singing, it was just washed over me. And I got really emotional. I was kind of embarrassed by why. I was like, why am I getting emotional? What's going on? So I didn't go to the rest of my classes. I hopped into my car. I just got paid from my little job at Cost Plus. And I went and spent all my money at Tower Records.
Yes.
I picked up as many records as I could afford by Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, and Billie Holiday. That's all I knew, like those names like he had talked about. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna buy up as much as I could. And I lived with those records nonstop for months. And I just couldn't believe that people sang like that. And I then became aware of Nat King Cole. He was just like another layer. And I remember when I got my heart broken for the first time, I listened to Smile over and over and over again. Yeah, and I had my friends would come in and I'd just be sitting, and they were like, why are you listening to this? But there was something that I really connected, and I didn't hear anything like that on the radio. Obviously, it was, the 90s, and I was very much a hip-hop head. I loved it. So that being in that environment, but then being able to listen to that music, and that's why I always, if Fred Berry is out there, I always credit a lot of my passion for American classical music to him. And I started just wanting to know how to sing. And I didn't know what the steps were. I was like, oh, what do you do? So I was like, okay, I'll sign up for a voice class. And I was in a piano lab, like just kind of picking up a few songs that I heard on the radio. And somebody walked by and was like, they heard me sing, they knocked on the door, they were like, oh, do you want to start a band? And I was like, a band? I was like, dude, I barely sing, I don't know. And because going into it, I did not know what I was doing. I was like, yeah, I play a little bit by ear, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I started taking more music classes. And what was funny about the guy that we started, playing high school auditoriums, things like that. We were just doing whatever was on the radio. My husband knew his family.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know him yet.
Grew up with his dad.
Okay.
Yeah, and so
playing music.
A friend of mine, she wanted to help me, hey, I have recording equipment. Maybe we can record something. And I was like, okay. And I just kept in my heart. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't like it. I need some lessons, but. There were some people that I met, and I didn't like their style of teaching. And so she, her name was Helen, she met Maestro, I believe at Globe Institute. She might have gone to one of your workshops there or something. And she was like, oh, I met the guy that's going to help you. And so I went to the studio, and I'll never forget when I met him. He was in this baby blue head to toe African outfit. It's just beautiful material.
Yeah.
He had long dreads. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful, intimidating human being that I've ever heard. And it's not like he was, I don't want to say like intimidating in a bad way. It was just, I've never seen anyone so confident. And it wasn't an arrogance. It was like, he just walked up and he had just, he smiled and, hi, how you doing? And I met him with like other singers that wanted to study with him. So he really opened the door for me. This is before we even got together, of just like, okay, who are your favorite singers? And I named them. He was like, okay, you got to find out who their favorite singers are and who they're influenced by. And he was like, I can give you a shortcut. It's all going to go back to New Orleans. I was like, oh, okay.
Yep.
So I always
down the river, through the port.
Exactly,
right? It all goes back. Yep.
Exactly. Yep. And I went on this journey. I filled up this large journal of singers and where they were from, what they liked. And I found that it influenced how I thought about just people around me and artists around me. And I found that I started because I grew up very religious, and I left the particular religion I was a part of. And what I had found was when I left the religion, I no longer connected with people with a reward in mind, which was like heaven. It was, I connected with people just for the sake of connecting with them.
Here on earth.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And when I found through music, when I found a commonality, that these people went through extraordinary hardships, that through the music they were still able to overcome. And I found that I was able to deal with some trauma of my own because, this music, American music, when people talk about soul singing, hip hop, rhythm and blues, that all comes from slavery. So when you find out the horrors of slavery, and there's like details that a lot of people don't know, but when you start uncovering those things, it's like these people went through horrors and gave us this cathartic art form that everybody in the world connects with. When you can bend notes, growl, moan, it's this cathartic healing that happens. And I realized, okay, with the things that I went through, which is nothing compared to the creators and ancestors what they had gone through in this country.
Right.
I was able to channel my own pain, but then also identify, things that we have similar in others. By studying these singers and musicians, I was like, oh, wow, okay, what connects me to them, that means I could connect with anybody. And that's what I almost became addicted to the research. And my husband then, when we got together, it was very natural. We didn't date. It was just natural. And I realized, I like this person. This is probably the first person that I actually like being around. I've had exes, but I was always slightly uncomfortable, or we didn't laugh at the same things. And I found myself and I was very hesitant. Well, he actually was hesitant as well because there's a large age difference. But because it was so natural for us, I was like, you know what, I've never really cared about what other people thought of me anyways. Why would I care now?
Right.
And one of the greatest lessons that I've learned from my husband, and I shared this on Instagram on Father's Day, was never let anyone define you but you. And that's a common thing. People say that all the time, but when you meet someone that actually lives it, and, there's a story about him. Sorry, honey, I keep talking about you. It's my thing. But what I find inspiring is that he has this scar on his hand, and the doctor told him that after he healed, that he would no longer be able to play the piano. He said, you don't have the last word. So now he doesn't have feeling in 2 of his fingers, but he's found his own way to play. And that's something that I do draw from in my mind. And it's something that I feel like a big part of my culture and my and I feel that's due to the religion is, it's sad, but a lot of Tongan people will grow up with like, oh, that's nice, that's for Palangi people, that's not for us. Palangi's white. So they might say like, oh, that's for Palangi people, that's not what we do. And then, but it's usually associated with things that are very nice. And it's like, wait, so I grew up with that, and then my husband had to like, well, you have to reprogram your thinking. You deserve everything. If that's what you want, don't take no for an answer.
That was Mama C, aka Nola Curtis. On the next episode of Storied San Francisco, we continue our chat with the Curtis family C-Notes, including all 5 kids. Catch part 2 this Thursday. Music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis McDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have more than 150 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, subscribe, rate, and review our show so we can reach even more folks. And if you'd like to drop us an old-fashioned email, we'd love that. The address is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay strong, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.